Democratic nominee is now facing new accusations of plagiarism over her 2009 book, Smart on Crime. All right, here with reaction, President and Executive Editor at the Daily Signal, Rob Bluey. Rob, thanks so much for being with us here. I'm going to start right with that plagiarism stuff because that is the new information coming in. Accusations against Kamala Harris for plagiarizing in her book. We know that President Biden was accused of plagiarizing back in 1987 in the primary debate, and even back in law school, which he has admitted. This doesn't go very far in making this party any more believable at this point, does it?
That's a great question, Katrina, and you're absolutely right. This is not the kind of accusation that they need at this 11th hour as the final sprint to the finish is here upon us. Any sort of distraction like this is a potential nightmare for the Harris campaign, particularly at a time where she's still trying to get her footing and distinguish herself from Joe Biden. You're right. Joe Biden was plagued by plagiarism throughout his career. He was forced to drop out of that 1988 presidential campaign as a result of those accusations. And now for her to be facing those charges, something that we've seen tarnish the careers of people like Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, not a good thing.
We want to bring in the National Review editor, Rich Lowry, into the conversation. Rich, good to see you here. We're learning that Kamala Harris's team is trying to figure out ways to distance herself after her disastrous interview on The View. She was asked, would you do anything different? Nothing that comes into mind in terms of I've been a part of the decisions that have had to impact Kamala Harris. Joe Biden clearly have done it together. Not much difference. In her own words, what do you think of their strategy now?
Well, it's getting awfully late to establish any separation from Joe Biden. I'm surprised she didn't seek some from the beginning. When she was asked in a 60 Minutes interview by Bill Whitaker, why didn't you guys toughen up at the border the first 3 years? She just could have said, well, I love Joe and I think he saved democracy, blah, blah, blah. But I do think he was too lax about this issue. She could do that on any number of things. There aren't Joe Biden loyalists out there. The Democratic Party isn't beholden to Joe Biden. She'll get all the latitude she needs. Instead, they decided to take this tack that she was part of every single important decision, and she wholly supports it, which is not a great place to be when the incumbent president you've been serving is at 40% approval.
It's interesting, Rob, because, we were just talking about the plagiarism allegations against Kamala Harris. And then what Bob mentioned and what Rich said, there's not that much time left. Again, we've got 22 days till Election Day to sort of right these wrongs. We know that Kamala Harris is not doing as well as she was during sort of her Harris honeymoon when she first was announced as the nominee. Do you think there's any chance that this campaign can get back on track in time?
Katrina, remember, people have already started voting in many states, including those crucial swing states. So in some cases, it may be too little too late. But yeah, I think that there's not a whole lot of time for her to correct these mistakes she's made in the past. For her to do so now, she would have to find some high-profile stage. There's no debates left. She's already done her media frenzy over the last week. I don't think she gave many convincing answers to sway the American people one way or another that she has a different plan and a different approach than Joe Biden. And let's face it, the American people have said over and over again by a margin of 2-1 that their personal finances are getting worse. If she's not going to change course, how are they going to have the optimism they need to pull the lever for her?
I think that's what it was all about. Voters hearing something different come out of Kamala Harris throughout this shortened campaign that she's put together. And she just said a couple days ago on The View, I was a part of every single decision. There's nothing I would change. Quite a stunning revelation, I would say so. Also, something I want to bring up, Rich, reports that an increasingly tense relationship between Biden and the Harris teams. Several pundits on both sides of the aisle, they're now saying that Biden himself is so bitter about being forced out that he is deliberately sabotaging the Harris campaign. That's kind of an October surprise. What do you think?
Yeah, I think sabotage is a little strong, but look, you were elected president of the United States and you got dumped unceremoniously by all those people that you thought were your friends. There's natural that you might feel a little bitter about that and have a little trouble letting go, and maybe secretly in some part of yourself might want Kamala to lose to prove, look, I could have won and she lost. But I think the things people pointed to are fairly minor in the scheme of things. And going back to the first part of our conversation, if Joe Biden attacked her, it might help Kamala. She needs separation from Joe Biden rather than the bear hug.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, Rob, we're almost out of time here. But once again, we are seeing the fact that Kamala Harris doesn't really seem to know who she is at this point. We know that seems to be hiding because obviously she's only giving easy interviews for the most part. But at the same time, she doesn't necessarily seem to know if she is her own woman or if she is Joe Biden's, I'm going to say, second in command, who's going to do all the same stuff that he does. Does that raise a red flag for you?
It sure does. And as you said earlier, I mean, it's a little too late in the campaign to try to figure out your communication strategy and shift styles. This is a big red flag for the American people. If she cannot speak on her own and be authentic to the voters, as Donald Trump so often is, I think that there's a stark contrast between the two candidates here. And frankly, when you're making those tough decisions late at night, when it comes to foreign policy or even domestic policy, you want somebody who's able to stand on their own and not necessarily lean on others for advice all the time.
Well, that brings us to our next point here, Rich. The left-leaning magazine, the Time magazine, Mark Benoff now calling out Vice President Harris for turning down multiple interview requests. He posted this on X, quote, "Despite multiple requests, Time has not been granted an interview with Kamala Harris. Unlike every other presidential candidate, we believe in transparency and publish each interview in full." Why don't you think Kamala Harris has been receptive to that?
Well, obviously, they've been reluctant to get her out there until recently. And then we've been talking about some of the results of that over the last week, especially that gaffe on The View. So I think they're walking this tightrope. They want her out there enough where it doesn't seem like she's scared or she can't do it. At the same time, they are worried about her doing it. So that's why she's said no to some very traditional things that presidential candidates usually do, and this is one of them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anything changes in those last 22 days. But, Rob, as you pointed out, lots of people already have done their mail-in voting. Decisions are made, signed, sealed, and delivered. All right, Rich Lowry, Rob Bluey, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.